Welcome to Campus Consortium's EdTalks, featuring the University of Texas at Austin. Today's presentation will focus on the future of IT in education. Ladies and gentlemen, Campus Consortium. Good afternoon and welcome to EdTalks, hosted by the Campus Consortium. The purpose of EdTalks is to facilitate thought leadership in the education community. Today's session is part of our 2020 series. We've asked our guest speaker to share with us his thoughts on what will education look like in 2020 and how will information technology evolve to meet the needs of students, faculty, and the administration. I would like to extend a warm welcome to today's guest speaker, Phil Long, Chief Innovation Officer and Associate Vice Provost for Learning Sciences at the University of Texas at Austin, a Campus Consortium member. Phil is one of the driving forces behind Project 2021, a UT Austin strategic initiative aimed to align the university towards education innovation, research-informed teaching and learning, and an optimal and lifelong student experience. In addition to his work on Project 2021, Phil provides leadership to the university's strategy for technology-enhanced learning, including UTX, the local implementation of the edX MOOCs, the UT Learning Analytics Initiative, and the design of learning environments. Phil, we have approximately 150 institutions from all across the world attending today's webinar. On behalf of our team and the attendees, thanks for taking the time to share with all of us your thoughts and insights about the future of technology and education. Without further ado, I'd like to pass the platform over to you, Phil.
Thank you very much. 150 institutions across the planet, that's a small bit of pressure, but no worries. It is a pleasure speaking with you today from Austin, and I've organized my talk as really a discourse, a conversation, so I hope there'll be plenty of question and answers as we go forward. Around 9 talking points, and that's what right at the edge of the Miller's ability to remember things in the 7 ± 2 rule of thumb. So we're right on the border of that. I'm going to start by framing this by saying that most of what I'm going to talk about are educational challenges, and I'm weaving in some of the technology-related issues that are associated with them. And at the end, I have, or can, depending on how the conversation goes, I can talk about specific technologies that might, in fact, be relevant today. But as you'll hear from the kinds of things I'm talking about, a lot of what I'm referring to in terms of the future of education aren't well served by some of the existing technologies. And that is, of course, our challenge. So to start, first I want to begin with what I'm going to call the post-course era and interdisciplinarity. And the context of this is that problems today are solved outside of the interdisciplinary boundaries. That is, they're by nature interdisciplinary. And this trend is going to increase as we go forward. We're seeing colleges and universities and even collections of departments reorganize around challenges. Arizona State is a prime example with some reorganization they did structurally for their College of Engineering. They might simply be reinstantiating themselves as new business units, but the dynamic nature of these challenges are such that there's a great deal of fluidity there. In fact, this is a fluidity that is going to be continuing and makes the organizational instantiation of departments and colleges and disciplines one that will be increasingly challenged. In effect, the infrastructure or units that really are being created, or the interdisciplinary points of focus are being created by the membership of these challenges. And in effect, they're defined by their property as being a member or collection of resources and people that have the designation of the challenge. It's kind of the inverse of the refactoring underway today in the learning environment, where courses are perhaps better seen as an emergent characteristics of individual students who select commonly a topic of study. So today's LMS systems that you are no doubt familiar with, almost exclusively, with very rare exceptions, organized around courses. And if you want to see the characteristics of individual students in relation to that, you've got to effectively parse all of the different course memberships in a repeated loop in order to extract that out. We know and we use CRM systems, customer relationship management systems, precisely because they aggregate the experiences of the customer with various parts of our organization into a coherent view from that particular individual's perspective. And indeed, that's the change that you're going to see in LMSs. And it is essentially a precursor to the change that I expect you will see in the structure of departments, colleges, and schools looking ahead. So what we're seeing with the great interest these days with systems like Salesforce is driven by that realization. And so as we move forward, one of the things I think you're going to start to see is an increasing focus of disciplinary integration that is in fact organized around challenges or grand challenges depending on their scope, which will need to be supported by the technology and underlying infrastructure enterprise systems that we actually use on our campuses. The second main point is a focus on academic learning and postgraduate earning. Then this is perhaps more relevant to institutions that are public institutions who have to increasingly demonstrate their value and accountability, not just in terms of how they spent their time and money to support the learning and journey of an individual undergraduate, for example, but also the outcome of that experience in terms of their employability, their income, and you'll see, for example, in the UK, beginning to measure student success and institution efficiency and effectiveness in terms of postgraduate earning potential as one of the key elements in their accountability metrics that are being revised as we speak. This is a huge impact because we tend to keep track of and pay greatest attention to our students as they are members of the paying population of undergraduates or graduate students in various formal programs. But we're going to have to start thinking about how we develop that map of their experiences as they participated with us directly toward working environments that they move into and their earning opportunities post-graduation. This is in some sense the pressure of the institution that in response to the larger economic trend toward the gig economy. And I think that we're seeing that we'll have to meet and be shaped by the concerns of the social well-being that's often sacrificed in this trajectory where, and by that I mean we don't pay too much attention to what happens to our graduates other than trying to reach them as alumni for potential contributors to our bottom line, but we're not necessarily looking at their resilience, their contentment, their success in the phase of their life that's post the immediate formal graduation, formal learning environment, post-graduation. Some of this has translation into what we call the difference between hard and soft skills. I'll just make a note that there's actually a transition going on at the moment where a number of people are starting to refer to the hard skills as things like teamwork, problem solving, creative thinking, and the hard skill and the soft skills as thermodynamics, differentiation, the various things that we once thought of as the sort of core disciplinary characteristics. And the reason that switch is underway is because we know how, or at least we have a sense of how to teach those so-called currently hard skills becoming refactored as soft skills. We have much greater difficulty in understanding how to teach effectively the skills associated with teamwork, problem solving, and the like, and hence those are in fact hard things to do. It also leads to the recognition that the learner must be considered part of the institution's student body, if you will, from the time they enroll and they're passage through our institutions as undergraduates, etc., but also to their transition to their role post their undergraduate career. We currently call those people alumni, and that makes sense from a marketing perspective in one way, but increasingly they are in fact, and need to be considered in fact, continuing members with all the privileges of the institution going forward in their post role as undergraduate. That means treating them differently. That means tagging them in different ways, because in reality, we are finding that those individuals have continuing needs for certification, skill upgrading, etc. And the consequence of that is that they are cycling back to us again and again, and we have to start removing the barriers between those categories. The next topic I want to raise is recognition of learning achievement. And this happens in many places and in many contexts, not just the classroom. But what we fail to do largely is make that recognition a shareable, transportable element. The rise of micro-credentials backed by metadata developed by badges, for example, provides a pathway towards an open recognition of learning achievements. But this is in fact what's driving to a large extent the push towards the extended transcript and various forms of recognizing the students' capabilities that badges, which are effectively a synonym for micro-credentials, have a means of enabling. And like all activities, there is a technology component and for all of this, but there's also an instructional delivery and a faculty culture component with respect to how you instantiate this recognition, the description of learning outcomes, which requires a rubric, which requires assessment, which requires evidence the learner submits by which the rubric is applied and judged, and the transcript then is a transparent way of showing that insight into the decision rules and evidence, and ultimately the actual work the student did in order for the transcript recording of a letter grade, for example, to have context and meaning. The portability of this achievement is going to be an increasingly challenging issue. Workers today stay at a job for about 4.4 years, according to current data. Workers are likely to have 15 or more jobs over their working lifetime. And coming back to the institutions that they touch along the way for a certificate, for a degree, for a CEU, for a CME, or whatever it is, across all of those different places, is just a nightmare that has to change. And there needs to be a mechanism by which the coherence of the student, of the learner's experience with formal education is better managed. And I'll get to that a little bit later on when I talk about blockchains. There is an importance of learner agency in all of this and the growth of learner agency. I'll just say then with respect to this that we don't we don't enable particularly the students to express their agency in ways. We give them opportunities to choose courses of study. We give them opportunities to enroll in degrees and majors and minors. But few institutions allow the aspirational aspect of the learner to be able to say, this is what I want to learn, and then negotiate the steps and pathways to achieve that. Some institutions have opportunities to construct degrees and such. My suggestion is that's going to become an increasingly important element of the undergraduate and formal learning experience. There's going to be a series of continued challenges that you all experience having today with respect to the ethics around the implementation of big data and analytics. Now we have to remember it's not really big in the comparison to astronomical data sets or nuclear physics or things like that. Educational data, pardon me, is in that sense relatively small, but from our traditional perspective, it is in fact big. What is a concern, and that needs to be addressed in this context, is how we go about the implementation of analytics purportedly to increase the likelihood of student retention and minimize attrition and make their journey through our institutions more effective. But this is going to require that we really transparently express our key principles for analytics and our treatment of data. IMS Global has just released the IMS Learning Data and Analytics Key Principles. These are principles that include things like clarity of ownership of the data. Most of our institutions tend to think that the data that the student generates they own, so they can manipulate it in various ways, and yet we often say that it's the student that owns that data. This is a challenge because if we say the student owns the data and we give them nothing and no mechanism to exert ownership, that is, agency over that ownership, then that's a claim that's meaningless. Other principles involved including the institution's role in the stewardship, governance, access, interoperability, and of course security, privacy of that data. Some institutions are actually doing experiments looking at the trajectory of learner data or student data as they engage with enterprise systems, and how it passes amongst those systems, and what the impact would be if they actually gave the learner the opportunity to say, I would not like this part of my data to be going to that system. What does that mean in terms of this institution's ability to do its job? Another element, and I'm getting towards the end of these, is the term-based course development and the notion of what I'm going to call the learning engineer. We're putting an awful lot of emphasis these days on what the role of the faculty is, and in many respects it's already stretched too far. It seems less and less realistic to believe that a faculty member can be a domain expert in their discipline, a productive researcher in that domain, an instructional designer, a UI expert, a learning scientist, and a dynamic presenter. People will have many of these attributes, but having all of them is simply unreasonable to assume. So we have to think about how we support and partition these roles, not necessarily into one per category, but at least into the team that needs to surround the faculty member in order to do that job well. And this is a cultural issue for the faculty member to rethink their role as much as it is for the institution to rethink its. But the role that I'm describing here as the learning engineer, a term that Bror Saxberg coined a couple of years ago in a Chronicle Higher Ed article, is really an individual with the learning science and cognitive psych skill, the learning design and computational skills to bring all of those capabilities to bear in the digital learning environment. And the Open University is a good example of one way in which that has been partitioned out with teams that support the domain expert in the building of courses. Some variation along that trajectory is going to likely become an important element of the institution, and technologically that has implications for repositories of content, repositories for learning design patterns, and various other resources that have to be available digitally to be brought to bear in the construction and design of a new course or a new learning sequence. Finally, I'll talk briefly about the challenges of personalized learning, and one of the problems with this is it's both a holy grail and a chimera. It's certainly appropriate to provide desirable difficulties for the learner to optimize their learning process. But in the process of individualization to that degree, we fail to recognize one of the key human characteristics of learning, and that is that we are social beings that have evolved over tens of thousands of years to be exquisitely capable and effectively in using our social interactions. And we know from lots of learning science that learning in social context is an extremely powerful format, that peer interaction is essential. And as we begin to develop and deploy these personalized learning environments, we have the problem of creating a personalized learning environment that is in the absence of social interaction, and therefore personalized learning environments that in fact lead to isolation, if not desolation. So we needed the technology to expose those learners that wish to have their presence and part of their trajectory made visible to their peers, expose that information to their peers so that they can find each other, form ad hoc groups, and allow for peer and encourage peer interaction as they go through their personalized learning journey. In effect, what we need to do is expose and make transparent the intersection of different personalized learning trajectories to others, because at any one point in time, it's likely that different personalized learning pathways are going to, in fact, be intersecting. The trend in the rise of openness is confronting our campuses, that is moving beyond the roots of simply open source and open access journals, but now moving to open data, open science, open educational resources and textbook publishing, and more generally open scholarship. What is emerging in this is that transparency is essential as an element of advancing knowledge, and that the network effects of open sharing accelerate both discovery, innovation, and progress. This isn't a battle between commercial practices and open sharing. It's about leveraging the two for sustainable strategies that, in fact, are powering this open movement. And that's a challenge for many of our institutions because we have concerns about security and concerns about identity in the age of evil actors. And that's going to be sort of a major theme as we go forward. We know that science works best in the context of collaboration. We know that the age of, for example, drug discovery, we're rapidly finding that the billions of dollars spent in individual, commercial, private drug discovery efforts is not leading to the blockbuster drugs that people hope for. And many of those same pharmaceutical companies that have practiced that are starting to open up their data sets and make them available and present challenges to a larger community to help them solve these problems that they have labored on and have been so far unsuccessful. In the context of this, we have the evil actors. Most recently, you're all aware of the latest exploits on the denial of service attacks on Dyn, for example, the internet point of presence in New York, where they effectively shut down significant portions of the internet by taking advantage of the proliferation largely of Internet of Things devices, security cameras and the like, which had very little security protection in themselves, organized those together, and those became attack botnets that flooded the internet in those areas. So that's the dynamic between open and security and identity that's going to be an ongoing dance as we go forward, because it's clear that we need to have greater openness and access to information, both as an equity issue as well as a pragmatic issue of scholarship. And it's equally clear that we have to be better at understanding the potential for theft, identity theft, and other nefarious actions that leverage that very characteristic of openness in ways that are harmful to us as a community. So those are the kinds of major themes I wanted to talk about. In terms of technologies, I've mentioned some of them along the way, but I'll briefly mention a few specifics. One of the bigger challenges is the need for the very large, complex things like student information systems to be much more loosely coupled sets of services, both to allow them to progress and innovate more rapidly, but also to enable the flexibility for increasingly varied notions of calendaring, and in fact the disappearance of calendaring when it comes to things like competency-based advancement, as well as supporting personal learning from the perspective of the learner, and persisting that through the different interactions that the learner has with their other institutional learning technologies like the LMS. There are also the beginnings of integration of data from things like regional and national job sites to be able to map those collections of skills for those jobs to the collections of skills associated with different learning outcomes, and from that be able to take effectively and tag skill sets by aggregating like things together and then mapping those to what jobs have those tagged attributes. We just saw an announcement this week for the National Center for Opportunity in Engineering and Analysis, NCOEA, which it is proclaiming to try to affect that same thing. And then there are badging environments that Pearson has in the form of Acclaim, for example, which already marry large national job data with the tagged attributes of badges. You're seeing, as I mentioned before, the impact of things like Salesforce on learning management systems. Right here in Texas, the Texas Institute for Transformational Learning has announced a major partnership with Salesforce to build that as the underlying building blocks for their learning environment, TEX2. And from SNHU, you saw Motivus Learning spin-off as another example of that. And then I mentioned it earlier on, and I'll terminate at this point with the formal presentation, but I'll mention the connection between recognition of achievement and its instantiation in the form of an immutable record independent of the institution. And the means for doing that is what's emerging in the blockchain world. And the integration of those two things is being referred to as a badge chain emergence. Here at UT, we in fact have a badge chain project underway. And what that's doing is taking the metadata associated with the characteristics of learning a particular identified skill set or competency that's represented in the data structure of a badge, and writing that into the actual cryptographically protected record of a block in a blockchain. The blockchain is, as you all probably know, a distributed database environment. In effect, multiple parties, tens, hundreds, thousands of instances of the ledger, if you will, together correspond to what we refer to as the blockchain. And the idea is if this gets written immutably into a block record and the learner has the public and private key access to their record in that blockchain, then the validation of the authenticity of whatever credential or achievement that has been recognized and issued by the institution is in fact done and created at the time that the block was written. And there is no need to do a validation check back to the issuing institution in the future. That both removes that burden on the part of the institution, but it also aggregates all the different learning experiences that the learner may have into a place which they control and may be supported by various businesses that offer value-added services around the retrieval, discovery, presentation of that data. But I think that's going to be a huge impact, or going to have a huge impact on learning environments and their recognition in the future. It's also the place by where we can, in fact, you get the data to. And I'll stop at that point.
Phil, thank you. That was beautiful. Your thoughts clearly represent your deep expertise in the higher ed and information technology space. We probably need to schedule a part 2 follow-on of this session to drill down. We could probably do a session on each topic as a drill down if that was almost a table of contents. But we appreciate the time that you took out of your schedule to share these thoughts with your colleagues from all across the world, from Dubai to Canada's in our backyard, all throughout the U.S. And also we had a bunch of K-12 institutions join as well. We'd also like to thank all of you attendees in taking time out of your schedules as well in joining us for EdTalks on the future of IT in education, hosted by the Campus Consortium. A link to today's recording will be posted on the Consortium's website and social media sites. We've taken a lot of input in terms of feedback and suggestions for improvement that have come in parallel as Phil was speaking. We hope that all of you found the session to be informative and insightful. As the year turns on the 12th, we'll be doing another one of these sessions. We do one every month. The next one will feature University of Chicago, so stay tuned for that EdTalks as well. Again, Phil, thanks. That was awesome. We appreciate it.